So looks like we can start the grooming meeting, and let me share my screen. So the first question which appeared during our yesterday conversation with Lori was like when we were preparing this document, Mass Action Tool. We start discussing what need to be migrated, whether it's just quantity data and the stock status, or something else. Because currently, taking into account that currently we are moving just quantity and the stock status, whether it's in stock or out of stock. But looks like we also need to move and configuration on a level of source. So this is pretty close to the topic which we are discussing on the previous grooming. Looking at this table with all the inventory option we have, and discussing what the option should be on a source level, and which of them should be on a stock level. So I propose to discuss whether we need to migrate the source item configuration as well.
I mean, from my perspective, it's an echo there. It's a case we need to cover. Otherwise, we would introduce additional steps for the merchant. So if we do the transfer as it is spec'd out now, they'll have to follow up with an additional step of going to set the settings that were not transferred over. In addition, that's not something that they can do in a mass action. So those settings they would have to go through for each product that they had transferred. So should we go through each of the settings and figure out which ones we need to add?
Mm-hmm. But
okay.
If you'll just postpone this process of setting adjustment, we can get into the situation when we'll make a migration and the data would not be consistent at this point of time. For example, we will move the quantity of the backordered source item to non-backorder source item, so we'll get like a minus quantity in a source item where backorder is not enabled.
Are you talking about the order that we need to do these? So we should almost transfer the settings first and then the quantities?
We can transfer settings along with the quantity. So we can resolve at the time of the migration, at the time of the inventory transfer, we can resolve all the settings on a level of each particular source item, and we will move these settings to newly created source item after the migration. So all of that's gonna be done in the scope of the of one operation, transfer inventory to source.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So
do we need to go through the settings one at a time here just to make sure we know what will be moved?
How it's gonna be? How it could be implemented from the user perspective? Because we have advanced inventory settings for on a level of particular product, but if we deal with a mass operation on a product grid, it would be really hard to adjust all of them, because potentially the configuration could differ for different source items.
Which configuration?
So I mean, like, give me. So right now, while we not started yet the story regarding the source and stock configuration, we have the only configuration option which is applicable on the level of source. This option is notify quantity. So this one. And the notify quantity is applicable on a level of source item, so the particular product which is assigned to particular source. And this option so this option actually represents the threshold reaching which the merchant would be notified that the product is running out of stock.
Mm-hmm.
And along with the source item migration, probably we also need to preserve this this option to have this option set with the same data after the migration for this particular source item.
Yeah, well, looks like we have 4. So the source item status, the quantity, the notify quantity, as well as the state of the checkbox.
Yes. Yeah, exactly, and the state of the checkbox as well. But as soon as we will start implementing the story, for source item configuration API, and as we agreed on a previous meeting, that for example, use quantity decimal gonna be a configuration option which is applicable on a level of source, and the backorders is a configuration option which is applicable on the level of source. So we also, at the time of the inventory migration, we also need to migrate backorder and the is quantity decimal as well. So all the configuration options applicable on the level of source. Does it make sense?
Well, no, because could we be in a conflicting scenario there? So if I do a mass action, I'm taking from multiple sources. They can have different settings at the source level for those settings, and then I move it to one. Which ones would we take?
That's true. So let me rephrase your question. You mean that backorder, like, because we can have backorder to be specified on the level of source item, like to be specified on the level of product which is located on a particular source, or it could be specified on the level of source. And at the time of migration, we need to resolve the backorder configuration on the level of source item. And having it resolved on the level of source item, we can migrate it to newly created source item without affecting other source items. So we no need to migrate the configuration option on the level of source, because in this case we can affect all the existing source item on a destination source. But instead we need to resolve the backorder configuration option on a level of source item in the from source, and move this to destination source, preserving this source item configuration.
All right, I think I get it. So I can explain it back to you, but I have 2 questions. So the first is, where do we set the backorder per source, not per source item? Because that's not a source setting that we have.
Yes, but this actually this actually is the internals and the requirements for this story, where we supposed to introduce new interfaces and new scoping for different configuration options. So, for example, here we'll have this get backorder status configuration, and there would be possible to specify it on the level of on the global level, on a source level, and on a source item level. And for example, it could be specified just on a global level, and if we leave it on a source item level, we will make a fallback first to the source level and after that to the global level, so we will get the data.
Sure, I understand how those work. Then once we make these changes, well, we have UI changes as well. So if you open the source now, we don't have a setting for allow back orders at the source configuration.
Yes. That's also a question to how our UI should look like, because instead of our Magento scoping, like here global, we supposed to have some drop down probably or something like that with the MSI scoping, which will provide an ability to specify some configuration option on a source item level or on a source level or on a global level. That's also a good question, and probably we need to ask Evgen Banov maybe to provide us some examples of look and feel how it could be implemented, because we need somehow to map MSI scoping with Magento scoping.
Well, I was just thinking yes, we do need his opinion, but if we have a place where we can set MSI global settings, which we already do in source configuration, then you can set globally there. If you want to override at the source level, we can add it to the source configuration. Then on this page, you would have the same option you have here where you can check use config settings, or you can override. And just think of that doesn't allow you to select between global configuration and source configuration though. The way it should work is maybe we have the same thing on the source configuration page. So if you go to the source configuration, we'll have another item there called allow back orders, and it will have a use config settings, use global settings checkbox. So you can set the MSI global settings. If you want to override it at the source level, you set it at source configuration. If you want to override further down to the source item level, you can do it here.
Yes, but the issue is also that we would have two different kinds of configuration. We'll have source configuration and we will have stock configuration. Because, for example, we still need to specify like minimal saleable quantity or quantity increment or some configuration options which are applicable on the level of stock, but not on the level of source. So we will like this one, for example, or Autostop threshold. So it's applicable on the level of stock.
Yeah, we need to get Eugene's opinion, but it would seem to make sense that we put those on each of the pages. So the stock level options we can put on the stock configuration page.
But the stock, that's true. So we can do it, but that's gonna be kind of global configuration. So you mean we can add this configuration here? And that's gonna be,
Yeah.
yeah, it's gonna be global configuration, so somewhere here.
Mm-hmm.
And along with that, along with that, we can add to the product page probably stock configuration. Yeah, that probably should work. Yeah, so here I also describe in API that it's going to be like two levels, like global level for stock, which we can add to the edit stock page, and for the stock item, so stock item configuration can be added to the product editing page. So that should work. So for example, like here, stock configuration. We already have here product saleable quantity, so something like that. We can add product like inventory configuration stock.
Mm-hmm.
And here something like advanced inventory is gonna be SourceItem configuration probably.
That's what this is. It's allowing you to override those higher level settings if you choose to do so for this stock item.
Mm-hmm.
So this page may not need much change in how it appears. We'll have to have him review it.
Yes, so we don't need to change how this page appear, but probably the content, so the settings on this page would be different, because we need to separate the configuration settings applicable on a source level from those ones which are applicable on a stock level. And in a once inventory, we can leave the options applicable on a source level, for example, and we will move all other options applicable on a stock level to, for example.
Right, but we shouldn't have any conflict because we don't have settings that are set on both levels.
Yes.
Between source and stock. I mean, you can override, say, global to source to source item, but that's not the same. You don't have a conflict between source and stock.
Yep, exactly. That's true.
So we understand the settings there. It's just a question of which page each setting will appear on.
And another thing that we can reuse, where it is. Catalog inventory. So here probably we can move all the global settings, both source and stock. For example, here we can move all the global settings. On the stock editing page, we can move all the configuration level of the stock. To the source editing page, we can move all the configuration settings of the source level. And to the product page, we will to this advanced
this slide out. Yeah.
So looks
then we'll
like
have only things you can override at the product level.
Yep. Exactly. So this should not drastically change the existing UI, and we can all we need to do is just add the configurations for source and stock editing pages. That looks like that's all. Okay, so if we agreed on it, so looks like we need to decide whether scoping is correct here, like going through all the configuration options. So like whether it's applicable, we can do it now, or we can do it after the meeting. So what do you prefer?
We can go through it here, but I had another question of, have we answered everything we need to about which settings at the source item level will be a part of the mass inventory transfer? Or do you have any more questions on that?
We can, because currently we have the only one setting on a source item level, because currently, before we started implementation of this story, we have the only source item configuration option, which is notify quantity, and along the way of this new story, we will add some more, and actually, these new configuration options will affect the behavior of inventory transfer functionality. Because currently, as for me, I see that we will also need to migrate the use quantity decimal and the backorders, and notify quantity for quantity below that's already existing option, and that's all. So that's probably a question whether we need to migrate any other configuration options, or
what
just
about,
if you go back to,
oh, sorry, what about out of stock threshold, since that really affects backorders?
Currently, we apply out of stock threshold on the level of stock. So because this is configuration option which affects the sellability quantity, and sellability quantity applies on a level of stock. So and that's why this option also applicable on level of stock. So this is already apply on a level of stock item configuration, but not on a level of the source item. So from the point of view, from the inventory point of view, from the warehouse point of view, actually warehouse not care much about the sellability quantity and what the quantity is allowed to be sold. So probably we no need to migrate this configuration option.
can you just switch back to the admin screen? So we would just need to migrate these four from what I see: the source item status, quantity, notify quantity, and the state of the checkbox.
Mm-hmm.
And we shouldn't migrate anything else, because then we would get into either a conflicting scenario or where we're overriding source level settings for the source that inventory is being transferred to, and we don't want to do that.
You mean even backorder?
Because backorder can be set all the way down to the product level, right?
Yep.
But that's not something that because that setting of whether the product itself is available for backorders is not set in MSI. That's a product setting. Are you saying what happens if we migrate a product that allows backorders to a source that does not?
But in this case, so the source cannot allow backordering, but taking into account that there is a configuration, there is source item configuration option for backorder, we will preserve the backorder configuration on the level of the source item. So we would not enable it on the level of source, but we enable it on the level of the source item for this migrated source item.
Maybe I don't follow, because that setting for the source item is set on the product. It's not set here.
It should be, I believe, after we will implement the story, backorder would be set here, like for this particular source. So what we will have actually, we will have this slide out panel for each source item. Now, currently it's one for the whole product, but after that it would be like advanced inventory setting for each row in a table. And
yeah,
we
definitely need to talk to Eugene then, because it would be much easier, for example, if we could have everything that you can change at the source item level there presented on one screen, so you don't have to slide out each one. It depends how many settings we can put in a row, but it's quite manual to have to slide out for each source if you had a lot of sources. Because right now I probably, I mean, there can be exceptions, but I probably want to set that backorder setting the same for one product across all the sources that product is in. And for me to do that with a slide out on each one, I have to set it on each one.
But looks like we need to have like a real grid instead of this UI element here.
It's possible. That's where we need him to weigh in.
But okay, that's I got your point. That's kind of UI stuff. But let's imagine that we have some way of describing it. Maybe it's a grid or something, and we have the backorder on a level of source item. So we're still able to specify the backorder on the level of source item, but not we can override the configuration on the level of source item as the one we have for source specified globally. So do we need to migrate this configuration setting for the source item to at the time of the inventory transfer? Like,
I understand what you mean, because that setting is made at, it's like the combination of the source item and source level. I'm saying for this source and this item, do I want backorders or not? So then when I migrate the item to another source.
Yeah. So I understand what you mean. So you mean that you don't consider it as an independent option. You consider it as a resolved option based on the configuration of source to which it is assigned to. Correct?
No, it's not a resolved option. You can set it at the source level, and you can override it at the source item level if you want to.
Yeah.
So in the case that I've made that override, but that override is per source. So in this case, you have new source and default. They can each have their own settings. So maybe they have don't allow, or maybe they have allow backorder for both of those sources, right? I could go in for this simple product and set it to do not allow backorder for that product in either one of these sources. That's right.
Yes.
So then the question is, does it make sense to migrate that setting, I take simple product, and move it to another source? I'm trying to think through here, because it doesn't really make sense, because the merchant should decide that for each source primarily. And then if they want to make overrides, they can do it at the source item level.
But
so I think it makes more sense to not transfer that as a part of the transfer. Because if you do that, then I move to another one, say new source 2. New source 2 will have a setting set at the source level for back orders. And the inventory I transfer over will come over and just take that setting. So we will have we'll move the override as part of the transfer.
But how in this case we need to treat negative quantities? For example, here we have like quantity -9, and this -9 quantity actually makes sense only in a case if we have backorder enabled. But if we will migrate the quantity -9 without backorder, actually what we will do, we will affect the salability of the product on another stock. Because currently what we do, we just make a total aggregation among all the source item which assigned to particular stock. So for example, if we have like 2 sources, we'll just sum up all the quantities among them. And if we will sum up the negative quantity, we will affect the salability quantity. But actually, if we say that we are moving the product to real source, to real warehouse, without backorder support, the negative quantity actually sounds a little bit weird in this case.
Right. So to repeat your question or summarize your question with a simple example.
Yeah. How to handle negative quantities if we are not migrating backorder?
Yeah. So the example would be I have 2 sources, 1 product, 2 sources, and backorder is enabled on one of the sources and not on the other.
Yep.
The product's currently assigned to the one where backorders are enabled, and it has a negative quantity, and I migrate it to the source where backorders are not enabled.
Yep, exactly.
So yeah, we have 2 choices there. Either you don't migrate the setting, but then you would have to impact the quantity. The quantity would have to go to 0. Or it's like you determine which setting to set based on a combination of the quantity and the source level settings. And then you'd have to migrate that as a stock item level setting.
But on a previous meeting, we agreed that stock item level setting would be calculatable based on the source item level settings. So
sorry,
it would be like
I didn't mean to say stock. I meant the source item. So we have a scenario where the product's on a source where backorder is enabled at the source level and the quantity is negative. You want to transfer it to another source where backorders are not enabled. In that case, we can't override the backorder enabled and stable setting at the source level in the new source, because that setting applies to all the products on the source unless they have an override. Yeah. So we don't want to impact that. The option we have is to allow backorders as an override for that product on the new source it's going to.
Yes.
And maintain the negative quantity that's already on the product as a part of the transfer.
Yes.
I mean, that seems to be the most logical way to do it. The other option is because we have a hard requirement now, right, that you have to have backorder enabled to have a negative quantity.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's for many good reasons. So our other option, which is not a good one, is to set it to 0 in such case. So you take a -1 and you wipe it out and go to 0. But then the merchant loses all types of tracking, so that's really not a feasible option.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we do have to talk to Eugene about how this can all be configured, but I think technically we understand what needs to happen. That we need to migrate these 4 settings you see here,
Mm-hmm.
plus the backorder setting. The backorder setting may end up being set on this screen if we figure out how to change this screen. But it will definitely need to be part of the transfer.
So
I guess the remaining question would be, do we transfer in every case, or only in the case where we have a negative quantity? Probably in every case.
In every case, yeah.
Because what I mean is, the reason that we do that is if the merchant has set that setting, they've set an override for that setting, then they must have meant to do so, and we should take it as part of the transfer. Because that's an optional thing to do. If they don't want to override it, they could just set everything at the source level and they're happy. They don't have to go down to SourceItem. So we infer the fact that because they made an override, it must be something worth preserving.
So looks like we have a solution on hand. And I understand from usability point of view, you prefer the option that all the source item configuration should be added as additional columns to this grid. So for example, we will add backorder column, and we will add kind of use quantity decimal column, and all of these options should be represented here. And the advanced inventory, it would be stock item configuration, which is applicable for like out of stock threshold or managed stock. So
the settings on this slide out should be the settings for the product that apply across all sources. And where the setting can vary by source, it needs to be in the grid or table or however we do it. So I don't want to prescribe from a UX perspective how it should be done. I would just say the requirement is on this screen, you can configure all settings that apply across sources. And if you close this slide out here.
Actually, from what I see, we will preserve all the quantities except backorder, except quantity use decimal, and except the checkbox use config settings. So these three options would be moved as independent columns to this grid, because
why would we move something like used as decimals? Because uses decimals is really about an attribute of what type of product that is. Is it a product I can buy in partial quantities? And we have it here as source.
That's actually a question. Do we need to support a situation when we have a product with the same SKU, which located on different sources, and in one source it is kind of decimal, on another it's integer value. For example, like a sugar. So we no need to support this situation. So we can say that
it doesn't make sense. Because as a merchant, even if maybe I sell sugar in different quantities, so I have a SKU for, the way I would do it is I have a SKU for bulk sugar, and then I would have a SKU for, like a 1 kilo bag, 10 kilo bag, and those would be different.
So our recommendation would be just to have different SKUs for these different product types.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense any other way, because that quantity uses decimals is really about the type of product that it is. And if you needed to vary it across sources, it would make much more sense to create 2 SKUs.
So I will fix it right now. that quantity use decimal supposed to be applied on a level of stock.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you could toggle back to the that slide out though. You mentioned 3 things there. Quantities of decimals is one of them. Multiple boxes for shipping, I think, should be across all sources. So the backorders is the only one that we would remove from this screen and add to the grid.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, what about out of stock threshold?
I was just looking at that.
We call Backorder, and if
out
we apply it to the on source level, maybe it's also have to be.
Actually, even now, out of stock threshold applied on level of stock. So we internally have a logic which check whether the, because out of stock threshold in a desired state will depend on not backorder functionality, but on a backorder functionality, like a calculated backorder functionality applied on a stock level. So we would not depend on a backorders on each particular source items, but instead we will calculate the backorder for product on particular stock, and we'll apply it afterwards, because we can have we can have one product allocated on several sources, and one of the sources is dropshipper, and we have the backorder enabled for it. Another source is a real warehouse which we manage, and the backorder is not enabled. So we would have a different backorder setting for all for both of these source items. But for on a front end, we need to have just one configuration. That configuration should be like aggregated one. It should be calculated the same as we have the saleability quantity. And based on these 2 option configuration, we will calculate the configuration for the backorder on the level of stock. And actually, for this calculated backorder configuration, we will apply this negative threshold. Like, let's consider the situation. Let's consider the situation. We have like a SKU 1, and we have source A in quantity 10, backorder enabled, and we have source B and backorder disabled. Here's, for example, quantity 20, and we have the source configuration. And we have stock configuration. We have mean quantity threshold, which is minus 20. So, like, what we are doing here, we need to get a stock item configuration for SKU1 on a given stock. So based on these source items, we calculate that backorder is enabled, and the saleable quantity is 10 plus 20 plus minus 20, which is 50. That's saleability quantity with the backorder enabled on a stock item level. So,
I'm sorry, Igor, but if backorder is enabled and Is it not quantity infinity if out of stock threshold is positive or 0?
That's true, but in this case,
can we talk about sellable quantity at all in this case?
We can talk about sellability quantity just in case if we have the minimal threshold here. Minimal threshold specifies the negative quantity. Actually, we on a front end, we never used the service like get product sellable quantity. We never use it. We use it just on an admin panel to show how many products we have available to sell. So, for example, this is here with all this service and on a product grid. But on a front end, we use the service. We use the service is product available for requested quantity. And this service, so we pass here the SKU, stock, and quantity which customer wants to put to the shopping cart, like 100. And this service under the hood check whether the backorder is enabled and check whether we can allocate the given number of products. So we, in this case, there is no sense to provide the saleable quantity as a value, but there is a sense to check whether we can fulfill an order beyond place. Does it make sense?
Another way to think about it is setting a negative minimum quantity threshold allows us to allow backorders but cap them at a limit. Whereas if we don't set that negatively, you could have an infinity saleable quantity because you can backorder forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but from another hand, if you have source B like normal warehouse where you want to only sell items what you already have, so you miss this this functionality of out of stock threshold because you set it negative, so the merchant would not be warned about that his warehouse run out of goods.
But you have another configuration option. You have another configuration option like notify quantity, and this option is supposed to notify merchant that this warehouse is running out of goods to fulfill orders.
Yeah, that's right.
And also, it will depend on your source priority. So, to even use source B, you would have to have it set as a higher priority in the stock than A, and it would exhaust all 20 units, and then it would start fulfilling from source A, and that it could do forever if it had a positive min quantity threshold.
Mm-hmm. Moreover, currently, like this, we have a logic now that this both configuration options can coexist. So, for example, now we have the backorder enable and the minimal min quantity threshold, which is negative, but potentially merchant can change the backorder configuration option for source A and specify it as disabled as well. And in this case, we are not updating the min quantity threshold here, but what we are doing, we will just we return instead of -20, we will return 0 if the calculated backorder is disabled. So in this case, calculated backorder would be disabled in both cases, and instead of using -20, we will use 0 here. But preserving the -20 the configuration option. So, for example, if after that user, so in this case the sellability quantity would be 30, but if merchant at some point of time will decide to specify backorder as enabled for source A again, we will start using this -20. So we have like two configuration options, which and the mean quantity is dependent on backorder value. So returning to this to this list of the settings which we are discussing, from my point of view, out of stock threshold should be applied on the level of product on stock, but not on the level of source item. So this is the correct place to have it. Are there any other ideas or thoughts regarding the other configuration options, whether they need to be moved on a level of source, or we are moving just only backorders and the use config settings for backorders?
Yeah, I was just looking through each of them. I don't see anything else that would need to be migrated.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that's good for us because that will probably decrease the amount of work need to be done.
I mean, we could move some of the others, but it would just be introducing completely unnecessary complexity that the merchant's probably not likely to use. Okay, do we have any other questions?
Probably no. So that was the main question regarding the configuration. And just let's summarize what we agreed upon. So we will move the backorders and the use config setting for backorders to this grid, and we'll apply it for the source item. And also we will migrate this configuration option along with the source item status quantity, notify quantity use default, backorders, and backorders use global. So they're going to be altogether 6 configuration options to be migrated at the time of the inventory transfer mechanism. And also we will add configuration section on a stock editing page for configuration option on the level of stock. So somewhere here, like configuration section. And also we will add configuration section on a level of source. For example, to specify, actually, in this case, it's going to be the only configuration option, probably to specify backorder. So we will add something like this, like configuration, and there would be just backorder. And looks like that's all. So for me it sounds good. Does it sound good for all of us? Okay, so taking into account that we are almost running out of time, I believe that's all for today's discussion.
Great.
Thank you for your time, Mark. Looks like we resolved, yeah, we resolved very tough question which we were thinking quite a lot of time about.
Yeah.
So that was really productive. Thank you.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
See you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.